What if I told you that the woman who raised me for 23 years looked me dead in the eye and screamed, "You're not my daughter," during our worst fight ever? And what if I told you that when I decided to prove her wrong with a DNA test, I discovered something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life? My name is Sarah, and today I'm sharing the most insane story of my life that literally reads like a soap opera plot, except it's 100% real. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to walk you through how one family argument led to the discovery that changed everything, how I uncovered a web of lies that went back decades, and why the truth was so much crazier than anything I could have imagined. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this, because by the end of this video, your jaw will be on the floor just like mine was. So grab your favorite snack, get comfortable, and let me tell you about the day my entire world turned upside down. The tension in our house had been building for months, and honestly, I should have seen it coming. My relationship with my mom had always been complicated, but lately, it felt like we were speaking completely different languages. Every conversation turned into an argument. Every family dinner ended in someone storming off. And the worst part was that I couldn't even figure out what I was doing wrong. It started with small things, you know? She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about my career choices, my boyfriend, even the way I dressed. But then it escalated into full-blown screaming matches about responsibility and respect. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted, and honestly, just wanting to eat dinner in peace. But my mom was already fired up about something, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. She started in on me about how I never helped around the house, which was totally unfair, because I literally did the dishes every single night. The argument spiraled so fast that I can barely remember how we went from talking about chores to her questioning every life decision I'd ever made. What really set me off was when she brought up my college years and started throwing around these accusations about how I was ungrateful for everything she'd sacrificed for me. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that I was doing my best, but she just kept cutting me off and talking over me. The more I tried to speak, the angrier she got, and I could see this look in her eyes that I'd never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something that felt almost like disgust. Then she said something that stopped me cold in my tracks. She looked at me with this expression of pure frustration and yelled, "Sometimes I look at you and I don't even know where you came from. You're nothing like me, nothing like your father, nothing like anyone in this family." At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic, you know? Parents say crazy stuff when they're angry, and I figured she was just trying to hurt my feelings. But then she kept going, and her voice got even louder. She started listing all the ways I was different from the rest of the family. How I looked different, acted different, thought differently about everything. She said I was selfish and stubborn, and that I never tried to fit in with the family's values. I was crying at this point, just completely overwhelmed by how cruel she was being. That's when she dropped the bomb that would change everything. She was standing there, red-faced and shaking with anger, and she screamed at the top of her lungs, "You know what? You're not my daughter. A real daughter wouldn't treat her mother like this." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I just stood there staring at her, unable to process what she'd just said. I remember the kitchen going completely silent, except for the sound of our heavy breathing. My mom looked like she immediately regretted saying it, but the damage was done. Those words were hanging in the air between us, and I knew that our relationship would never be the same. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the house without saying another word. For the next 3 days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Sure, she was angry, but there was something about the way she said it that felt different from her usual dramatic outbursts. It felt too specific, too pointed, like maybe there was some truth behind the anger. I started thinking about all the little things I'd noticed over the years, but never really questioned. I had always been taller than both my parents, with completely different hair color and eye color. My personality was nothing like theirs, and I'd always felt like the odd one out at family gatherings. People used to joke that I must be adopted, but I'd always laughed it off because, come on, that's ridiculous, right? But now those jokes were echoing in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they weren't jokes at all. That's when I made the decision that would turn my entire life upside down. I was going to get a DNA test. Not because I really thought my mom wasn't my biological mother, but because I needed to prove to myself that she was wrong. I needed that scientific evidence to show her just how hurtful and ridiculous her words had been. Little did I know, I was about to discover something that would make her cruel words seem like the least of my problems. Getting that DNA test was both the easiest and hardest thing I'd ever done. Easy because it literally just required spitting into a tube and mailing it off, but hard because every day I waited for results felt like torture. I kept going back and forth between thinking I was being completely paranoid and wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was something my family had never told me. The waiting period was supposed to be 6 to 8 weeks, but it felt like 6 to 8 years. During those weeks, I became obsessed with looking through old family photos and documents. I was searching for any evidence that might explain why I felt so different from everyone else. I found it weird that there were hardly any photos of my mom pregnant with me, and the few that existed seemed staged and awkward. I also noticed that I looked nothing like my baby pictures compared to how my older brother looked in his, but I tried to convince myself that babies just look different sometimes. I started asking subtle questions about my birth and early childhood, trying not to seem suspicious. My dad would always change the subject or give vague answers about how I was such a surprise and how they weren't expecting me. My mom, meanwhile, was still barely speaking to me after our fight, so getting information from her was impossible. The more questions I asked, the more evasive everyone became. The breakthrough came when I was helping my aunt clean out her attic and found a box of old letters and cards. Most of them were just typical family correspondence, but there was one envelope that caught my attention. It was addressed to my mom and dated about 6 months before my supposed birth date. The return address was from something called Sacred Heart Adoption Services, and my hands literally started shaking when I saw it. I waited until my aunt was in another room before I opened it, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. It was a letter confirming my mom's application to adopt a baby girl, and it mentioned something about finalizing the placement in the spring. The timeline matched up perfectly with when I was supposedly born, and suddenly everything started clicking into place. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on one letter, so I kept digging. I started researching Sacred Heart Adoption Services online and discovered that they had closed down in the early 2000s, but their records had been transferred to the state. I also found out that there were legal ways to access adoption records if you were the adoptee, which gave me hope that I could get real answers. The DNA results came back on a Thursday morning, and I almost didn't open the email because I was so terrified of what it might say. When I finally clicked on it, my worst fears were confirmed. The test showed zero genetic relationship between me and the woman who had raised me as her daughter for 23 years. Zero. Not even distant cousins or anything that could be explained away by some weird family history. But here's where the story gets even crazier. The DNA test also showed that I had several close genetic matches to people I'd never heard of. There was a woman named Patricia who showed up as a potential mother or sister, and a man named David who could be my father or uncle. These weren't just random distant relatives. These were people who shared significant amounts of DNA with me. I spent the entire day staring at those results, crying, and trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to march over to my parents' house and confront them immediately, but another part of me knew I needed more information before I could have that conversation. I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened and why they had lied to me for my entire life. That night, I made the decision to reach out to Patricia through the DNA website's messaging system. I sent her a simple message explaining that we showed up as close genetic matches and asking if she knew anything about my family history. What happened next was something I could never have prepared for, and it opened up a whole new chapter in this already insane story. Patricia responded to my message within 12 hours, and what she told me absolutely shattered what was left of my world. She wasn't just a random genetic match. She was my biological mother, and she had been looking for me for over 20 years. But here's the kicker that makes this story even more unbelievable. She never gave me up for adoption. According to Patricia, I was stolen from the hospital when I was just 3 days old. I know that sounds completely insane, like something out of a movie, but let me explain what actually happened. Patricia was 17 when she had me, and she was planning to raise me as a single mother, despite pressure from her family to give me up for adoption. She had named me Emma, and we spent 3 days together in the hospital, bonding and figuring out this whole motherhood thing. She was scheduled to be discharged on the fourth day, but when she woke up that morning, I was gone. The hospital told her that there had been a mix-up with the paperwork and that I had been transferred to another facility, but when she tried to track me down, she hit wall after wall of bureaucracy and confusion. Different people told her different stories about where I had gone, and eventually, she was told that there was no record of her ever having a baby at that hospital. Can you imagine being 17 years old and having the entire system gaslight you about your own child? Patricia spent years trying to find me, hiring private investigators when she could afford it, and filing police reports that went nowhere. She never stopped believing that I was out there somewhere, but after decades of dead ends, she had started to lose hope. When my DNA results popped up in her matches, she said she cried for 3 hours straight because she finally had proof that she wasn't crazy, that I really did exist. But the story gets even more twisted when you learn about how I ended up with the people I thought were my parents. Through Patricia's investigation and some records she had managed to obtain over the years, we discovered that my adoptive mom had been working as a nurse at the hospital where I was born. She had been trying to have children for years with no success, and apparently, she saw an opportunity and took it. The adoption agency letter I had found in my aunt's attic was part of an elaborate cover story to make the adoption look legitimate. My adoptive parents had created fake paperwork, bribed hospital staff, and constructed an entire narrative about adopting me through proper channels. They had even moved to a different state shortly after taking me, probably to make it harder for Patricia to track us down. When I finally confronted my adoptive parents with the DNA results and Patricia's story, their reaction told me everything I needed to know. My adoptive mom didn't deny it. Instead, she broke down crying and started talking about how desperate she had been for a child and how she convinced herself that Patricia was too young to be a good mother. She actually tried to justify what she had done by saying she gave me a better life than Patricia could have provided. My adoptive dad claimed he didn't know the full extent of what my mom had done, but I could tell he was lying. There's no way you accidentally participate in stealing a baby and creating fake adoption documents. The betrayal I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. These people had not only lied to me my entire life, but they had also stolen me from my real mother and destroyed her life in the process. The legal implications of what they had done were staggering. What they committed was kidnapping, fraud, and probably a dozen other felonies. But here's the really messed up part. Because so much time had passed, and because I was now an adult, prosecution was going to be incredibly difficult. The statute of limitations had run out on most of the crimes, and proving everything after 23 years was going to be nearly impossible. But you know what? I didn't care about the legal stuff at that point. What mattered to me was connecting with Patricia, my real mother, and trying to build a relationship with the person who had been grieving my loss for over 2 decades. And let me tell you, that first phone call between us was the most emotional conversation of my entire life, and it's something I'll never forget. So where does that leave us now, 6 months after this whole crazy journey began? Well, Patricia and I are slowly building a relationship, and it's been both amazing and incredibly difficult. We're essentially strangers who share DNA and a traumatic history, trying to figure out how to be mother and daughter after missing 23 years together. Some days are better than others, but we're both committed to making it work. As for my adoptive parents, I've cut off all contact with them. I know some people think that's harsh, but I can't get past what they did. It wasn't just the lie about the adoption. It was the fact that they stole me from someone who loved me and wanted me, and then they made me feel guilty my entire life for not being grateful enough for their sacrifice. The woman who screamed, "You're not my daughter," was right, but not in the way she thought. The weird thing is, I actually feel relieved now that I know the truth. All those years of feeling like I didn't fit in, like I was fundamentally different from my family, finally make sense. I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful. I was literally living with people who had no biological or emotional connection to me, people who had built our entire relationship on a foundation of lies and criminal activity. Patricia has introduced me to my biological father, David, who never even knew I existed. He's married with kids now, and integrating into his family has been another whole adventure that probably deserves its own video. I also have biological siblings I'm getting to know, and it's wild how much we have in common, despite being raised in completely different environments. The DNA test that I ordered to prove my adoptive mom wrong ended up being the key to unlocking my entire real identity. If I hadn't been so stubborn and determined to prove her wrong, I might never have discovered the truth. Sometimes being petty and impulsive actually pays off, and this is definitely one of those times. To anyone watching this who feels like they don't quite fit in their family, or who has nagging doubts about their origins, trust your instincts. Those DNA tests aren't just for tracing your ancestry back to Ireland or finding out you're 3% Neanderthal. They can literally change your life and connect you with family you never knew existed. I also want to say that if you're going through something similar, please reach out for support. This whole experience has been traumatic in ways I didn't expect, and therapy has been absolutely essential for helping me process everything. Don't try to handle something this big on your own. The craziest part of this whole story is that it started with a fight about doing the dishes and ended with me discovering that my entire life was based on a lie. It just goes to show that you never know what's lurking beneath the surface of your family's history, and sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. If this story resonated with you, or if you found it as insane as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to hear about next, and thank you so much for watching. Trust me, your family drama has nothing on this craziness.